Mia Sullivan heard the sound before she understood it. A thin, broken whimper came from somewhere beneath the dead leaves behind the diner, and her whole body went still. It was almost midnight. Her shift had just ended, and the parking lot lights buzzed behind her as she walked the narrow path through the trees that led to her apartment. She had walked this path 100 times. She had never heard anything like this. She stopped and listened again. The whimper came again, closer this time, and underneath it, something else. Dozens of small voices, crying at once, muffled, as if they were trapped underground. Mia's heart began to pound. She almost turned back toward the diner to get her phone charger from her locker, to pretend she had heard nothing, to walk home and forget it. But something in those cries would not let her walk away. She stepped off the path and pushed through the bushes, her shoes sinking into the wet ground. The crying grew louder. She reached a wide patch of earth covered with branches and dead leaves, arranged too neatly to be natural. Her stomach turned. She had read about traps like this before, hidden pits dug by hunters or poachers, covered to catch animals that wandered too close. She dropped to her knees and began pulling the branches away with her bare hands, ignoring the scratches on her palms. The moment she cleared enough branches, she saw them. Down in the pit, pressed together in a shivering, crying mass, were small wolf cubs. She counted without meaning to. 22 of them. Some were barely bigger than a loaf of bread. Their fur was damp, matted with mud, and several had thin cuts along their legs from the fall. They looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes, and for a moment, none of them moved. Then one cub let out a soft cry, and the spell broke. Mia leaned into the pit as far as she could and reached for the nearest cub. It flinched at first, then pressed itself into her hands as if it understood she meant no harm. She lifted it out gently and set it aside, then reached for the next one, and the next. Her arms ached almost immediately, but she did not stop. She talked to them the whole time, in a soft, steady voice, the same voice she used to calm down upset customers at the diner during the late shift. "You're okay," she whispered. "I've got you. Just a little more." The pit was deep, deeper than she had first realized, and some of the cubs were too small to reach the top on their own. She had to climb halfway down, bracing her feet against the dirt walls, and lift them out one by one. By the time she pulled the last cub free, her jacket was ruined. Her jeans were soaked through, and her hands were shaking from the cold and the effort. But all 22 cubs were out of the pit, huddled around her feet in the moonlight. She sat back on her heels and looked at them. 22 pairs of eyes looked back. It should have frightened her. A grown woman, alone in the woods at midnight, surrounded by wild animals. But there was something in the way they gathered close to her, the way they leaned against her legs and pressed their small bodies together for warmth, that made her feel more protective than afraid. "What am I supposed to do with all of you?" she murmured. She could not leave them there. Whoever built that trap might come back before morning. She thought about calling animal control, but the diner was miles from any real town, and the local rescue services were slow even during the day. At night, no one would come in time. She thought about the woods themselves, the rumors that circulated in town about strange howls that carried farther than they should, about livestock that vanished without a trace, about hikers who swore they saw eyes in the dark that were too intelligent to belong to ordinary animals. Mia had always dismissed those stories as nothing more than talk. Standing there with 22 cubs pressed against her, she was no longer so sure. She made a decision. She would take them home for the night, get them warm and fed, and figure out the rest in the morning. It was not a good plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it was the only one she had. Carrying 22 cubs was impossible, so she improvised. She took off her jacket and used it as a makeshift sling for the smallest ones, then coaxed the rest to follow her by walking slowly and speaking softly, the way she had once seen a nature show tell you to move around nervous animals. To her surprise, it worked. The cubs followed her in a ragged, exhausted line, some limping, some stumbling, but all of them moving together, as if they trusted her more than they trusted anything else in the dark woods around them. It took nearly an hour to get them all back to her small apartment above the laundromat. She had to make 3 trips up the narrow stairs, carrying 2 or 3 cubs at a time while the others waited nervously in the stairwell, and by the time the last one was inside, her arms felt like they belonged to someone else. She closed the door, locked it, and turned to see 22 wolf cubs sitting in her tiny living room, staring up at her. "Okay," she said, out of breath. "Let's get you all warm." She spent the next several hours moving between the kitchen and the living room, warming milk on the stove and pouring it into every bowl, cup, and container she owned. She tore up an old blanket into pieces so more of the cubs could have something soft to lie on. She checked each one for injuries, cleaning small cuts with a damp cloth and murmuring reassurances the entire time. Some of the cubs cried when she touched their wounds, and she found herself crying along with them, overwhelmed by how small and helpless they seemed. and by the strange fact that they had ended up in her care at all. As the night wore on, she noticed things that did not make sense. One cub, dark-furred and slightly larger than the rest, watched her constantly, its eyes following her every movement with an alertness that seemed too sharp for an animal. Another cub, when she accidentally bumped into the table leg and hissed in pain, tilted its head at her in a way that looked almost like concern. A third cub, when she left the room to get more blankets, let out a series of short, deliberate sounds, almost like it was trying to organize the others, keeping them calm, keeping them together. Mia told herself she was exhausted, that her mind was playing tricks on her after a long shift, and a terrifying discovery in the woods. But some part of her, quiet and persistent, refused to believe it was nothing. By the time the sky outside her window began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, all 22 cubs were asleep, curled together in overlapping piles across her living room floor. Mia sat on the edge of her couch, too wired to sleep herself, watching them breathe. She thought about the pit in the woods, so carefully built, so precisely hidden. Traps like that did not happen by accident. Someone had built it on purpose, and they had built it to catch exactly what she found. She did not know yet who had built it, or why. She did not know that somewhere deep in the forest, a search party of grown wolves was already tearing through the underbrush, following a scent trail that led straight toward her front door. She did not know that the cubs sleeping in her living room were not ordinary animals at all, and that the decision she made that night, kneeling in the mud and pulling small shivering bodies out of a hidden pit, was about to change the entire course of her life. All she knew, as the first light of morning touched the windows, was that 22 lives had been placed in her hands, and she was not going to let anything happen to them. She looked down at the cub nearest to her, the dark-furred one that had watched her so closely all night. Its eyes were open again, gleaming faintly in the dim light, fixed on her face. "I don't know what you are," she whispered, "but I'm not letting anyone hurt you, not one of you." The cub blinked slowly, as if it understood every word, and pressed its small head against her hand. Outside, far beyond the edge of town, the wind carried a long, mournful howl through the trees, one that seemed to echo from 100 throats at once, and it was answered a moment later by another, closer, angrier, moving fast in the direction of the diner. Mia had no way of knowing the search had already begun. The morning brought no relief, only new problems. Mia woke to find every cub awake and hungry, crowding around her ankles the moment she stood up, and she realized with a jolt that she had no idea how much or how often wolf cubs needed to eat, no idea what was safe for them, and no idea how she was supposed to keep 22 wild animals hidden in an apartment above a laundromat without someone noticing. She used what she had: more warm milk, softened bread, small pieces of cooked chicken from her refrigerator. The cubs ate everything she offered, some gently, some with a desperate hunger that told her they had gone far longer without food than any young animal should. She watched them eat, and felt her resolve harden. Whoever had left them in that pit had not just trapped them, they had abandoned them to starve. She spent the day calling in sick to her shift at the diner, something she almost never did, and used the hours to research everything she could about wolves, their needs, their behavior, their care. Most of what she found did not match what she was seeing in her own living room. Wolf cubs, according to every article, needed near constant supervision from their mother, could not survive long separated from a pack, and displayed none of the calm, almost coordinated behavior she witnessed throughout the day. Her cubs organized themselves into small groups without being told. They took turns near the 2 space heaters she had running. The larger, dark-furred cub continued to watch her, and increasingly, seemed to be watching the door. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a message from her manager at the diner, asking if she could come in for even a few hours, since the weekend crowd was heavier than expected. Mia stared at the message for a long time before typing back a short apology, something about a stomach bug, anything to buy herself more hours away from prying eyes. She hated lying to a manager who had always been kind to her, but she could not imagine explaining the truth, that her apartment was currently filled floor to wall with wolf cubs she had pulled from a hole in the ground. She spent part of the afternoon at the window, watching the street below with a wariness that surprised her. Twice, she thought she saw someone lingering near the base of the stairs longer than necessary, a delivery driver checking an address, an older man walking a dog that barked at nothing in particular, and both times her pulse spiked before reason caught up with her fear. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself the same thing an hour later when it happened a third time. The cubs seemed to sense her unease. Sable, in particular, rarely left her side that day, trailing her from room to room with an attentiveness that felt less like a young animal following its caretaker, and more like a small sentry standing guard. Whenever Mia paused near the window, Sable paused too, ears lifted, nose working the air as though trying to catch a scent Mia herself could never hope to detect. By late afternoon, hunger and exhaustion had worn down Mia's nerves considerably, but she forced herself to keep functioning, warming more milk, refreshing water bowls fashioned from mixing bowls and an old ice bucket, checking each cub's small injuries again to make sure nothing had worsened overnight. A few of the cubs had begun to play with each other in short bursts, tumbling over one another across the living room floor, a small, hopeful sign that the worst of their fear was beginning to ease, even if Mia's own fear showed no sign of doing the same. She tried, more than once, to imagine calling someone, anyone, who might help her make sense of what she had found. A wildlife rescue center 2 towns over, a distant cousin who worked at a veterinary clinic. Each time, she stopped herself before dialing, some instinct warning her that involving anyone else might put both herself and the cubs in greater danger rather than less. Whatever these animals truly were, and by now she suspected strongly that they were not animals at all in the way she understood the word. They were clearly hunted, clearly hidden from a world that was not supposed to know they existed. Bringing in outsiders felt like exactly the wrong move to make. As the sun began to sink lower behind the tree line outside her window, Mia found herself standing again at the glass, watching the shadows lengthen across the parking lot below. The cubs had grown quiet behind her, most of them settling into an uneasy doze despite the late hour, worn out from a day spent in an unfamiliar space, surrounded by unfamiliar smells and sounds. Somewhere out past the edge of the trees, faint enough that she almost convinced herself she imagined it, she heard the same low, distant howl she had heard the night before, rising and falling like a question thrown out into the dark, waiting for an answer. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass and watched the tree line for a long moment, waiting for something she could not name. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, but she forced herself to stay alert. She had a feeling, one she could not explain, that the woods were not finished with her yet. She was right. Damien Cross stood at the edge of the pit and felt something inside his chest turn to ice. The branches lay scattered across the ground, torn away in haste rather than caution, and the pit itself was empty. 22 cubs, gone. He dropped to one knee and pressed his palm against the disturbed earth, and the scent that rose to meet him was not blood, not death, but something else entirely. Human. Report, he said, his voice low and hard. Ethan Marlowe, his second in command, crouched beside him, following the same trail with his eyes narrowed. Single set of footprints, small, a woman, judging by the stride. He paused, running his fingers along a groove in the dirt near the pit's edge. She climbed down. More than once, she was pulling them out. Damien's jaw tightened. For 3 days, ever since the cubs had gone missing from the nursery grounds deep in pack territory, he had feared the worst. Poachers, rival packs, something with claws and teeth that had dragged 22 of his people's children into the dark and left nothing behind. Instead, he was looking at evidence that a lone human woman had found them, and instead of running, instead of calling for help that would have exposed everything his pack worked so hard to hide, she had climbed into a hole in the ground and carried them out herself. It made no sense, and it terrified him more than any predator could have. "Gather the others," Damien said, rising to his feet. "We follow the trail." The pack moved fast and silent through the trees, a discipline bred into every one of them since birth, but Damien's mind raced faster than his feet. As Alpha King, he carried the weight of every life in his territory, but the cubs were different. They were the future. Losing them was not simply a tragedy. It was an existential wound that could unravel everything his family had built over generations, and now that wound had a human face attached to it, one he did not yet understand. The trail led them out of the deep forest and toward the edge of human land, past the boundary his people rarely crossed except in secret, and finally to the outskirts of a small town built around a single main road. Diners, a gas station, a laundromat with a narrow staircase leading to apartments above it. The scent trail thinned as it crossed pavement, but it did not disappear. "She works there," said Grace Whitlow, one of the trackers, gesturing toward the diner with its dark windows and empty parking lot. "Her scent is strongest near the back door. Kitchen work, most likely, judging by the grease and coffee mixed into it." Damien studied the building for a long moment. Somewhere beyond it, in one of those apartments, were 22 of his people's children, in the hands of a stranger who had no idea what she was truly holding. The rational part of him understood the danger of moving carelessly. If she panicked, if she called for help, if word spread that wolves existed in these woods in a form no one was supposed to know about, the consequences could be severe, not just for his pack, but for every hidden community like it across the region. But the instinct of a father, Of a king, responsible for every child under his protection, drowned out caution entirely. "We find her tonight," he said, quietly. "No one is to shift in the open. No one touches her unless she threatens the cubs directly. Do you understand me?" The pack nodded, tension coiled tight in every one of them. They waited until the streets emptied and the last lights in town flickered out one by one. Damien led them through the shadows behind the buildings, following the scent up a narrow alley and toward a set of external stairs bolted to the side of the laundromat. Through a gap in the curtains of the apartment above, he could see movement, small shapes shifting restlessly across a lit floor. His breath caught. There they were. He climbed the stairs first, his men close behind him, every sense alert. He reached the door and lifted his hand to knock, then hesitated. What would he say? How does an alpha king explain himself to a human woman who had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of his world? Before he could decide, the door opened. Mia stood in the doorway, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, but her eyes were sharp and unafraid as they moved from Damien to the men behind him. Behind her, in the dim light of the apartment, 22 cubs pressed themselves against her legs, some growling weakly, all of them refusing to back away from her. "If you're here for them," Mia said, her voice steady despite the tremor Damien could hear underneath it, "you're going to have to explain yourselves first." Damien stared at her, genuinely speechless for the first time in longer than he could remember. Behind him, he heard Ethan mutter something under his breath, disbelief plain in his tone. The cubs, his cubs, the future of his entire pack, stood clustered protectively around this human woman, as if she were one of their own. As if in a single night, she had become something they trusted more than the search party sent to bring them home. "You found them in a pit," Damien said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "In the woods behind this diner." "I did," Mia said, "and whoever built that trap wanted them dead. So before you take one more step toward this door, you're going to tell me who did this, and why." Damien's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something closer to reluctant respect. He had expected fear. He had expected panic, or perhaps foolish bravery born of ignorance. Instead, he found a woman standing her ground, with full knowledge that something was deeply wrong, refusing to hand over children she had known for less than a day, to strangers who had not yet earned her trust. "My name is Damien Cross," he said slowly. "These cubs belong to my pack. I am their alpha, and I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, that I am not the one who put them in that pit." Mia studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. She found none, only exhaustion and fear that mirrored her own. Behind her, the dark-furred cub that had watched her all night stepped forward and made a small, plaintive sound in Damien's direction, one that made his shoulders drop with visible relief. "Sable," he murmured, recognizing the cub instantly. "You're all right. His name is Sable?" Mia asked. "She," Damien corrected quietly. "She's the firstborn of this litter. She'll lead one day, if she survives long enough to grow into it." Something in the way he said it, the weight of worry beneath the words, made Mia's grip on the doorframe loosen slightly. She stepped back, just enough to let him see clearly into the apartment, though she did not fully open the door. "They're safe," she said. "I fed them, I cleaned their cuts, I kept them warm all night. But I want to know who did this to them, and I want to know they're not going to be led right back into danger the moment I hand them over." Damien looked past her at the cubs, all 22 of them alive, fed, and cared for despite everything that had happened. He thought of the alternative, the outcome he had feared with every step through the forest, and felt something in his chest ease for the first time in 3 days. "You have my word," he said, "and you have earned the right to know everything, if you're willing to hear it." Mia held his gaze for a long moment, then finally stepped aside and opened the door fully. "Then you'd better come in," she said, quietly. "They're finally starting to fall asleep again." Damien nodded to his men to remain outside, then stepped through the doorway alone, into a small, crowded apartment that smelled of warm milk and old blankets, filled with 22 sleeping cubs and one woman who had, in less than a day, become someone his entire pack now owed a debt they could never fully repay. He moved slowly through the room, careful of where he placed his feet among the sleeping bodies, and knelt beside each cub in turn, resting a hand lightly on their small backs, feeling the steady rise and fall of their breathing beneath his palm. Mia watched him from across the room, arms crossed loosely over her chest, still guarded despite the vulnerability now visible in his expression. "You care about them," she said quietly. It was not quite a question. "More than anything," Damien answered, not looking up from the cub in front of him. "Every one of them. Some people believe a king should not grow attached to any single life beneath his protection, that it clouds judgment when hard decisions must be made. I have never found a way to feel otherwise. Mia considered that for a moment, some of the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. That's not a flaw, she said. Where I come from, that's usually what makes someone worth trusting in the first place. Damien looked up at her then, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. I hope you're right, he said, because I intend to ask a great deal of your trust before this is over. He rose slowly to his feet, careful not to disturb the cubs nearest him, and studied the small apartment properly for the first time, taking in the torn blankets, the empty milk cartons stacked by the sink, the makeshift beds fashioned from towels and couch cushions arranged with obvious care despite their improvised nature. You did all of this in a single night, he said, more to himself than to her. I didn't exactly have a manual, Mia said, a faint, exhausted smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite everything. No, Damien agreed, something almost like warmth entering his voice for the first time since he had arrived. I suppose you didn't. He did not yet know that the true danger to his people had not come from outside the pack at all, and that the woman standing before him, still wary, still protective, was about to become the only person capable of exposing it. The apartment felt smaller with Damien standing inside it. Mia watched him move carefully around the sleeping cubs, crouching beside each one, checking their small bodies for injuries with a gentleness that surprised her. He had the bearing of someone used to being obeyed instantly, yet here, surrounded by children who could not yet speak for themselves, he moved like a man terrified of causing harm by accident. You said someone built that trap on purpose, Mia said, keeping her voice low. Tell me who. Damien did not look up immediately. He finished checking a small, sandy-colored cub near the window before he finally sat back on his heels and met her eyes. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I intend to find out. That's not good enough. It's the truth, he said, an edge creeping into his voice, though it was not directed at her. The nursery grounds are among the most protected places in our territory, guarded day and night. For someone to take 22 cubs without triggering a single alarm, without leaving a struggle, without anyone hearing anything, that person had to know exactly how our defenses work. That means someone inside the pack. Mia sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, processing what he had just told her. You think one of your own people did this? I think it's the only explanation that fits, Damien said, and that terrifies me more than any outside enemy could. Silence settled between them, broken only by the soft breathing of the sleeping cubs. Mia studied Damien's face, the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands, though steady, seemed to want to move, to act, to fix something that could not simply be fixed with strength. Why would anyone in your own pack want to hurt children? She asked. Damien's expression darkened. Power, succession. There are those who believe the line of leadership should pass differently than tradition dictates. If something happened to these cubs, particularly to Sable, the future of who leads this pack would be thrown into chaos. Chaos that certain people could use to their advantage. Mia looked over at the dark-furred cub curled against her leg, the one Damien had called Sable, the one who would lead one day if she survived. The idea that something so small, so vulnerable, could be the target of a calculated plot made her stomach turn. So what happens now, she asked. You take them home, and then what? You just wait for whoever did this to try again? No, Damien said firmly. Now we find them, and we make certain nothing like this ever threatens them again. We? Something flickered across Damien's face, an uncertainty that looked almost out of place on features built for command. You found them. You saved them. Whether either of us intended it or not, you are now connected to this in a way that cannot be undone. The traitor within my pack knows the cubs are missing. If word reaches them that a human discovered the trap and pulled the cubs out alive, you become someone they will want silenced. The word hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them wanted to acknowledge. Silenced, Mia repeated. I won't allow it, Damien said, and the certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. But it means I cannot simply take the cubs and walk away as though tonight never happened. Your safety is now tied to theirs, whether you asked for that responsibility or not. Mia looked around her small apartment, at the 22 sleeping cubs who trusted her enough to rest peacefully, even with a stranger sitting a few feet away. And she thought about the pit in the woods, so carefully hidden, built by someone who had access to information no outsider should have had. She thought about walking away from all of it, going back to her ordinary life of long shifts and tired feet and small tips left on chipped plates, and pretending none of this had ever happened. She found she could not do it. What do you need from me? She asked. Damien studied her for a long moment, as though searching for hesitation, for regret, for any sign that she might change her mind once the shock of the night wore off. He found none. "For now," he said, "somewhere safe for the cubs to stay while I return to my territory and begin investigating. Somewhere the traitor will not think to look, at least not immediately." "They're staying here," Mia said. It was not a question. "For now," Damien agreed. "I will leave guards nearby, out of sight, watching the building. If anything happens, if anyone unfamiliar comes near, they will act immediately." "And you?" "I will return to Packlands and begin questioning those closest to the nursery grounds, quietly. If the traitor suspects I know something is wrong, they may act rashly, and I need them to believe the investigation is going nowhere." Mia nodded slowly, though a knot of worry tightened in her chest. "How long will that take?" "I don't know," Damien admitted. "But I promise you this, I will return, and when I do, I will not come empty-handed. You will have answers." He rose to his feet, careful not to disturb the cubs still sleeping across the floor, and moved toward the door. Before he opened it, he turned back to look at her one more time, and something in his expression had shifted, softened at the edges in a way that made Mia's breath catch unexpectedly. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for what you did tonight. I don't know many humans who would have done the same." "I don't know many wolves who would have thanked me for it," Mia replied, and for the first time since he had arrived, the corner of Damien's mouth lifted, just slightly, into something that was almost a smile. "Rest," he said. "You've earned it. I will return before nightfall tomorrow." He slipped out the door as quietly as he had entered, and Mia listened to his footsteps fade down the stairs, followed a moment later by the soft, retreating sound of several sets of feet moving away into the dark. She locked the door behind him and leaned against it, letting out a long breath she had not realized she was holding. Around her, the cubs stirred faintly in their sleep, but none of them woke. She looked down at Sable, curled peacefully near the couch, and felt a strange, fierce protectiveness settle over her, one she had not expected to feel so quickly for creatures she had known for less than a full day. "Looks like it's just us again," she whispered. "For now, anyway." She did not sleep that night, not really. She sat among the cubs, watching the door, listening to every sound outside, replaying everything Damien had told her. Someone within his own pack had tried to eliminate the future of an entire community, and she had unknowingly stepped directly into the middle of it. There was no undoing that now. There was only moving forward, carefully, and hoping that whoever had built that trap did not yet know her name. In the hours before Damien's arrival that first night, Mia had barely allowed herself to think beyond the next immediate task: warming milk, checking wounds, keeping the cubs calm. Now, with him gone and the apartment quiet again except for the soft breathing of 22 sleeping cubs, the full weight of what she had agreed to finally settled over her. She thought about her mother, 3 states away, who called every Sunday evening expecting to hear about nothing more dramatic than a difficult customer or a broken coffee machine. She thought about her small, unremarkable life, the one she had built carefully out of double shifts and modest savings, a life that had never once prepared her for hidden kings or traitors within secret packs or trapdoors built to murder children. She wondered briefly whether she was making a terrible mistake, whether ordinary caution would have told her to call the authorities the moment she found that pit and let someone else handle whatever waited beneath those branches. But then she looked at the cubs sleeping around her, safe and warm because of choices she had made in the dark, and she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would make every one of those same choices again. Near dawn, Sable stirred from her spot near the couch and padded quietly across the room to where Mia sat, climbing awkwardly into her lap despite her size, pressing her small body against Mia's chest with a trust that felt like an anchor holding her steady against every doubt still swirling through her mind. "I don't know what's coming next," Mia whispered to the cub, stroking the fur along her back. "But I promise you, whatever it is, I'm not walking away now." Sable made a soft, satisfied sound and settled further into her lap, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, Mia allowed herself a few minutes of genuine, if uneasy, rest. She did not know, as the night wore on and the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, that the traitor within Damien's pack had already begun to suspect that something had gone wrong, and that the search for answers was about to become far more dangerous than either she or Damien had imagined. A sharp knock rattled Mia's door just after sunrise, and every cub in the apartment jolted awake at once, ears pinned back, small bodies pressed low to the floor. Mia's heart lurched. Damien had said he would return before nightfall, not at dawn, and certainly not with a knock that carried none of the caution he had shown the night before. She moved carefully between the cubs to reach the door, glancing through the narrow gap in the curtains first. A woman stood on the landing outside, unfamiliar, dressed plainly, her expression pleasant in a way that did not quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" Mia asked through the door, not opening it. "I'm looking for someone who might have found something unusual last night," the woman said. "In the woods behind the diner." Every muscle in Mia's body went rigid. She glanced back at the cubs, several of whom had gone completely silent, watching the door with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mia said carefully. "Of course you don't," the woman replied, her tone still pleasant, though something colder moved underneath it now. "But I think you do, and I think it would be much safer for everyone involved if you handed them over quietly, before anyone else gets hurt." Mia's pulse hammered in her ears. This was not one of Damien's people. She had seen the way his own pack looked at the cubs the night before, protective, relieved, careful. This woman's voice carried none of that warmth. It carried threat, thinly disguised as concern. "I think you have the wrong apartment," Mia said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I don't," the woman said simply. "Sable's scent is all over this door. I'd recognize it anywhere. She's a very special cub, you know. Far too special to be left in the care of someone who has no idea what she truly is." Mia's blood ran cold. This woman knew Sable's name. She knew which cub mattered most. That was not information a random stranger would have. "You're the one who set the trap," Mia said quietly, the realization settling into her chest like a stone. The woman's pleasant expression did not waver, but something in her eyes sharpened. "I don't know what you mean. I simply came to collect what belongs to the pack. Damien sent me." "No, he didn't," Mia said immediately. "He told me he would come back himself." A flicker of irritation crossed the woman's face before she smoothed it away. "Clever girl, though not clever enough to have kept your door locked against strangers claiming to speak for kings." Mia stepped back from the door instinctively, her mind racing. Damien had warned her that the traitor within his pack might act if they learned a human had found the cubs alive. She had not expected them to arrive so quickly, or so boldly, standing on her own doorstep in broad daylight. "I'm calling the police," Mia said loudly, hoping the threat alone might be enough to send the woman away. "Go ahead," the woman said, unfazed. "Tell them a strange woman came asking about wolf cubs. See how quickly they believe you, or how quickly word spreads that you know something you shouldn't. Either way, you lose." Mia's hands trembled as she backed further into the apartment, glancing at the cubs now clustered tightly together near the far wall, Sable positioned protectively in front of the smaller ones, teeth bared despite her tiny size. The sight of that small, fierce cub trying to shield her siblings steadied something in Mia's chest, turning fear into resolve. "You're not getting anywhere near them," Mia said, her voice hardening. Outside, the woman's expression finally cracked, just slightly, revealing the frustration beneath the calm mask she had worn since arriving. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in. This isn't your fight. Hand them over, and you can go back to your ordinary life, untouched by any of this." "They're not going anywhere," Mia said firmly. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the woman's slow, deliberate footsteps as she paced along the landing outside the door. Mia strained to hear any sign of others with her, any indication of how many people she might be facing if this confrontation escalated further. She heard nothing beyond the single set of footsteps, but that did little to ease the tight knot of fear coiling in her stomach. Then, distantly, she heard something else. A low growl, carried on the wind from somewhere near the base of the stairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of movement, several sets of feet closing in fast. The woman outside froze mid-step. "Guards," she muttered, almost to herself, before her voice sharpened with urgency. "This isn't over." Mia heard her turn and hurry away, her footsteps quickening into something close to a run, and moments later, the sound of Damien's voice rang out from the base of the stairs, sharp with command. "Stop her!" Chaos erupted outside for several long seconds, the sound of a scuffle, low snarls, someone crying out in surprise, before finally, silence settled again. Mia stood frozen by her door, cubs pressed close around her legs, until a firm, familiar knock sounded, followed immediately by Damien's voice. "Mia, it's me. Open the door." She unlocked it with shaking hands and pulled it open to find Damien standing there, breathing hard, a thin scratch visible along his forearm, his eyes immediately scanning the room behind her, counting the cubs in a single sweeping glance before returning to her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," Mia said, though her voice trembled slightly. "But someone was just here, a woman. She knew Sable's name. She said she'd come to collect what belongs to the pack, and when I didn't believe her, she threatened me." Damien's jaw tightened, fury flashing across his features. Did she give you a name? No. She got away before you arrived. He cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with frustration and fear in equal measure. She knew Sable's name specifically. That narrows the list of who could be responsible considerably. Very few outside the inner circle know which cub matters most to the pack's future. So you're closer to finding out who did this, Mia said. Closer, Damien agreed. But now they know you're involved directly, not just as someone who stumbled onto the cubs by accident, but as someone actively protecting them. That makes you a target in a way you weren't before. Mia felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the apartment. What does that mean for me? Damien met her eyes, and the weight of responsibility in his gaze was unmistakable. It means I am not leaving you or these cubs unprotected again. Not for a single moment, until this traitor is found and dealt with. Behind them, Sable padded forward and pressed herself against Mia's leg, a small, determined sound rising from her throat, as though even she understood that the danger circling them all had just drawn considerably closer. Mia looked down at the cub, then back up at Damien, and steadied her breathing. Then let's find them, she said, before they try again. Damien studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind the worry in his eyes, before he finally nodded. Together then, he said, starting now. He turned to address the guards still standing watch near the doorway, issuing quiet instructions that sent two of them hurrying down the stairs to secure the perimeter around the laundromat more thoroughly than before. Others fanned out toward the tree line, searching for any lingering trace of the woman who had come to Mia's door, though Damien did not seem hopeful they would find much. She'll have covered her scent the moment she realized she'd been caught, he said grimly, watching his people work. Whoever trained her understood exactly what she was walking into. Trained her, Mia repeated. You think someone sent her specifically, prepared for exactly this kind of confrontation? I think whoever is behind this has been planning for longer than 3 days, Damien said. Which means they anticipated the possibility of the cubs surviving, and they had a contingency ready the moment that possibility became reality. The thought settled uneasily over both of them. Mia moved back into the apartment, gathering the cubs closer together instinctively, counting them again despite already knowing the number by heart, 22. All present, all unharmed, at least for now. Sable watched her count with quiet, solemn eyes, as though she too understood exactly how precarious their safety remained. I need you to trust me on something, Damien said, following her inside and lowering his voice further. From this point forward, you are not simply someone who happened to find the cubs. You are someone actively protecting them, someone the traitor now views as an obstacle to whatever they intended to accomplish. That makes you a target in every sense of the word, and I will not pretend otherwise to make either of us feel more comfortable. I'd rather know the truth, Mia said. I've had enough surprises for 1 week. A faint, humorless smile crossed Damien's face at that. Then here is the truth. I cannot guarantee your safety completely, not until this traitor is found. What I can guarantee is that I will not leave your side, or theirs, until that happens. Mia held his gaze for a long moment, weighing the weight of that promise, before finally nodding. Then let's not waste any more time standing here talking about it. Damien's mouth twitched, something almost like respect flickering behind his eyes. Together then, he said again, starting now. The decision to move the cubs came fast, faster than Mia had time to fully process. Within an hour of the confrontation on her doorstep, Damien had a plan in motion, one that involved leaving the apartment above the laundromat entirely and relocating everyone, cubs included, to a secure location deeper within pack territory. It isn't safe here anymore, Damien explained, helping Mia gather blankets and supplies while his guards watched the street below through gaps in the curtains. She knows this location now. Even if she doesn't return herself, she may send others. And your territory is safer? Mia asked, folding a blanket around two of the smaller cubs who whimpered softly at being disturbed from their nap. It's guarded, Damien said, properly this time, and I will not make the mistake of assuming our own defenses are enough without personally overseeing them. Moving 22 cubs through open country in daylight was no small task, but Damien's people had clearly done this before, coordinating with quiet efficiency that impressed Mia despite her exhaustion. Several guards carried the smallest cubs in slings similar to the one she had improvised the night she found them, while the older cubs, Sable included, walked in a tight, disciplined line, flanked on all sides by watchful adults. Mia walked near the front, beside Damien, her mind still reeling from the morning's confrontation. She replayed the woman's words over and over, searching for any detail that might help identify her, but nothing new surfaced beyond the unsettling certainty that whoever she was, she had access to information only someone close to the pack's inner circle should possess. Tell me about your pack, Mia said eventually, partly to fill the silence, partly because she realized she knew almost nothing about the world she had suddenly found herself thrust into. How does it work? Who would want to hurt children badly enough to plan something like this? Damien was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the tree line ahead out of habit rather than immediate suspicion. Our pack operates on a system of inherited leadership, passed through bloodline, though earned through strength and wisdom as much as birth. Sable's line has held leadership for 4 generations. There are those who believe leadership should rotate among different bloodlines instead, that concentrating power in one family for too long invites corruption. So this could be political, Mia said. Almost certainly, Damien confirmed. Though politics rarely justifies harming children, even among those who disagree with tradition. Whoever did this crossed a line that should be impossible to cross, regardless of their motivations. Do you have any idea who might feel strongly enough to actually act on it? Damien's expression darkened further. There are a handful of families who have voiced dissent over the years, vocally, but never violently, not until now. I intend to speak with each of them personally once we reach the territory. They walked in silence for a while after that, the forest thickening around them as they moved deeper away from human roads and toward the hidden heart of Damien's territory. Mia found herself watching the cubs as they walked, noting how naturally they organized themselves, how the older ones instinctively watched over the younger, how even exhausted and frightened, they maintained a kind of quiet discipline that spoke to instincts far older than any of them. They trust you, Damien observed, following her gaze. Even now, surrounded by my people, they still look to you first. I don't know why, Mia admitted. I'm not one of them. I don't understand half of what's happening. I just did what felt right. That's precisely why, Damien said quietly. You didn't hesitate, and you didn't ask for anything in return. That kind of trust isn't given easily, not even among our own kind. You've earned something rare. Mia glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something caught between gratitude and something deeper. Something neither of them had time to examine given the circumstances pressing in around them. They reached the edge of pack territory as the sun climbed higher, passing through a boundary marked by nothing visible to Mia's eyes but clearly understood by every wolf around her. A subtle shift in posture, a collective easing of tension, as they crossed from vulnerable open ground into the protected heart of Damien's domain. The territory itself surprised her. She had expected something wild and untamed, but instead found a carefully organized community hidden among the trees, structures built with a blend of natural materials and quiet ingenuity, all of it arranged in a way that left almost no visible trace to anyone who might stumble upon it from outside. Wolves moved between the structures in both human and animal forms, some pausing to watch the newcomers with open curiosity, others hurrying forward with obvious relief at the sight of the returning cubs. Welcome to my home, Damien said quietly, watching her reaction. Such as it is. It's incredible, Mia said honestly, taking in the careful balance between civilization and wilderness surrounding her. I had no idea something like this existed so close to town. Few humans do, Damien said. And it needs to stay that way, for everyone's protection, including yours. They settled the cubs into a large, secure structure near the center of the territory, one clearly designed for exactly this purpose, filled with soft bedding and watched over by several trusted guards positioned at every entrance. Mia helped settle the smaller cubs into their new space, relieved to see them finally relax somewhat, surrounded by the familiar scents and sounds of their true home. Once the cubs were settled, Damien led her to a smaller structure nearby, one clearly reserved for more private conversation. You should rest, he said. But first, there are things you deserve to know, about what's coming next, and about the danger you've placed yourself in by helping us. Mia sat down across from him, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the immediate crisis had passed. Tell me everything, she said. I want to understand exactly what I've walked into. Damien studied her for a long moment, weighing how much to share, before finally beginning to speak, laying out the delicate political tensions simmering beneath his pack's surface, tensions that had apparently grown sharp enough for someone to attempt something as drastic and cruel as what had happened to the cubs. As he spoke, Mia listened carefully, piecing together a picture of a world far more complicated and dangerous than she could have imagined only 2 days earlier, and realizing with growing certainty that there would be no simple way to step back out of it now, even if she wanted to. There is one more thing you should understand, Damien said eventually, his voice growing quieter, more careful. Sable is not simply the next in line by tradition alone. She was born during a rare alignment our elders consider significant, one that occurs perhaps once every several generations. Some believe leaders born during such times carry a particular strength, a particular wisdom, that shapes an entire era of the pack's future. So she's not just next in line, Mia said slowly. She's supposed to be something more. Many believe so, Damien confirmed, which makes her simultaneously the greatest hope this pack has for its future, and the single most dangerous target for anyone hoping to prevent that future from arriving. Mia looked toward the door of the nursery structure, where she could just make out Sable's small shape settling in among her siblings, unaware of the weight of expectation already resting on shoulders too young to fully understand it. That's an enormous burden for someone so small. It is, Damien agreed, something heavy passing behind his eyes. One I hope to shield her from for as long as possible. But burdens like this rarely wait for convenient timing. Is that why someone wanted her gone specifically? Nia asked. Not just to disrupt succession in general, but because of what she specifically represents? I believe so, Damien said, which means whoever orchestrated this understands our traditions intimately, understands exactly which cub matters most, and chose their moment with the kind of precision that speaks to years of careful planning, not a sudden impulsive act. Mia absorbed this in silence for a moment, the scope of the conspiracy settling over her more heavily than before. Then we're not just looking for someone angry about tradition, she said finally. We're looking for someone who has been waiting for exactly this opportunity for a very long time. Yes, Damien said grimly, which means they will not give up simply because their first attempt failed. If anything, knowing that a human now stands protectively between them and their goal will only make them more determined, not less. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did not want to. A meeting had been called before Mia even finished resting, and by the time she woke from a short, uneasy nap, word had already spread through the territory that the Alpha King intended to speak with every senior family regarding the missing cubs. She found Damien pacing outside the structure where she slept, tension radiating from every line of his body. They're gathering now, he said, before she could ask. All the senior families, anyone with enough standing to have known about the nursery's defenses in detail. Do you think the traitor will be there? Mia asked, following him toward a large clearing where wolves in both human and animal form had begun assembling in tense clusters. Almost certainly, Damien said grimly, which means I need you to watch carefully. You have no history with these families, no preconceived loyalties clouding your judgment. Sometimes an outsider notices what those too close to the situation cannot. Mia nodded, though nerves tightened in her stomach at the responsibility being placed on her. She had spent less than 2 days in this world, and already she was being asked to help identify a traitor capable of endangering 22 children without hesitation. The clearing filled quickly. Dozens of wolves arranging themselves into loose family groups, murmuring among themselves with expressions ranging from concern to barely restrained anger. Damien moved through the crowd with practiced authority, and silence fell almost immediately as he reached the center of the gathering, Mia standing slightly behind him, aware of the curious and wary glances directed her way. 3 nights ago, Damien began, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. 22 cubs were taken from the nursery grounds without triggering a single alarm. They were found abandoned in a pit, dug specifically to hide, and eventually eliminate them. They survived only because a human woman happened upon them before it was too late. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, several families exchanging uneasy glances at the mention of a human's involvement. I do not believe this was the work of an outside enemy, Damien continued, his eyes moving deliberately across the gathered families. Our nursery grounds are among the most heavily guarded locations in our territory. Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of our defenses. That means the traitor stands among us today. The tension in the clearing sharpened instantly, murmurs turning into low, uneasy exchanges, several families shifting defensively as suspicious glances darted between them. Mia watched carefully, as Damien had asked, studying reactions rather than words. Most of the assembled wolves displayed genuine shock and anger at the accusation, exactly what she would have expected from innocent parties confronted with such a betrayal. But near the edge of the clearing, one family stood notably still, their expressions carefully neutral in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. She leaned close to Damien, keeping her voice low. The family near the far tree line. They're too calm. Damien's eyes flicked briefly toward the group she indicated. A family Mia would later learn belonged to a senior beta named Holden Ashcroft, a longtime advisor whose family had served the pack's leadership for generations. Holden has never given me reason to doubt his loyalty, Damien murmured back, though uncertainty flickered across his features nonetheless. Maybe not directly, Mia said, but watch his daughter. Damien's gaze shifted to the young woman standing slightly apart from Holden, her posture rigid, her eyes darting frequently toward the tree line as though anticipating an escape route rather than simply attending a difficult gathering. Before Damien could respond, a voice rang out from within the crowd, sharp and accusatory. "Perhaps the real question," said an older wolf Mia did not recognize, "is why a human was near the nursery grounds at all. How do we know she isn't responsible, using rescue as a convenient cover?" Several murmurs of agreement followed, and Mia felt the weight of suspicious eyes turning toward her instead. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stand firm rather than retreat. "I found the cubs by accident, walking home from my job," she said clearly, her voice carrying despite her nerves. "I didn't know wolves existed in a form like this until Damien showed up at my door. If I wanted to harm them, I had every opportunity to do so alone in those woods, with no one watching. Instead, I spent the entire night keeping them warm and fed." "Convenient timing nonetheless," the older wolf pressed. "Enough," Damien said, his voice cutting through the growing tension with unmistakable authority. "This woman saved 22 lives at considerable risk to herself, asking nothing in return. Anyone who continues questioning her loyalty questions my judgment as well, and I would advise against that." The clearing fell silent at the implied warning, and the older wolf who had spoken retreated slightly, though his expression remained skeptical. Mia used the momentary quiet to study Holden's daughter again, noting how her hands had curled into tight fists at her sides, how her breathing had grown noticeably shallow since the accusation of a traitor was first raised. It was subtle, easy to miss amid the general tension of the gathering, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. The gathering continued for some time longer, Damien carefully questioning each family about their whereabouts and knowledge regarding the nursery's defenses, but Mia's attention remained fixed on Holden's daughter, whose composure grew increasingly strained as the meeting wore on. Finally, as the gathering began to disperse, Mia caught Damien's arm gently. "We need to talk to her," she said quietly. "Alone, before she has time to prepare herself further." Damien studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Her name is Willow," he said. "I've known her since she was a cub herself. I never suspected her of anything before today." "Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to suspect," Mia said. "That doesn't mean the suspicion isn't warranted." Damien's expression tightened with reluctant acceptance. "Then let's find out the truth," he said, "before she has the chance to disappear." Before they reached her, Ethan fell into step beside Damien, his voice low and urgent. "My king, are you certain about this? Holden's family has served this pack loyally for 3 generations. Accusing his daughter without solid proof could fracture trust we can't afford to lose right now, especially with the pack already unsettled by everything that's happened." "I am not accusing anyone yet," Damien said, though his eyes remained fixed on Willow's retreating figure. "I am asking questions. If she has nothing to hide, she has nothing to fear from answering them. And if she does have something to hide," Ethan pressed, "then we will finally have the beginning of an answer we desperately need," Damien said. Mia walked slightly ahead of both of them, her attention still locked on Willow, noting the subtle shift in the young woman's posture as she realized she was being followed rather than simply passed by in the general dispersal of the crowd. Willow's steps had quickened almost imperceptibly, her shoulders drawing tighter, and Mia recognized the particular kind of tension in her body, the tension of someone calculating an exit rather than simply hurrying home. "She's not just nervous," Mia murmured to Damien as they closed the distance. "She's looking for a way out. Watch her eyes. She keeps checking the tree line, not the path back to her family's dwelling." Damien's expression sharpened at the observation. "Then we need to reach her before she decides the tree line is worth the risk." He quickened his pace, and Mia matched him, both of them closing the gap as Willow neared the edge of the clearing, her hand already brushing against the low branches of the nearest tree, as though preparing to disappear into the forest beyond. Together they moved through the dispersing crowd, following Willow's retreating figure toward the edge of the clearing, unaware that she had already noticed their approach, and was calculating, with growing desperation, exactly how much time remained before her carefully hidden involvement was exposed entirely. Willow moved quickly through the thinning crowd, weaving between departing families with an urgency that only confirmed Mia's suspicions. Damien caught up to her first, his hand landing gently but firmly on her shoulder before she could slip away entirely. "Willow," he said, his voice calm despite the tension coiled beneath it. "A word, if you don't mind." She turned slowly, her expression arranged into careful neutrality, though Mia could see the effort it took to maintain it. "Of course, my king. Though I don't know what more I can add to what's already been discussed." "Perhaps nothing," Damien said. "Or perhaps quite a lot. Walk with us." Willow hesitated only a moment before nodding, falling into step beside them as they moved away from the dispersing crowd toward a quieter section of the territory. Mia watched her carefully the entire time, noting the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers kept curling and uncurling at her sides, small tells that spoke louder than any words she might offer. "You've served this pack faithfully your whole life," Damien said, once they were far enough from prying ears. "Your father before you as well. I have no wish to accuse you unfairly." "Then don't," Willow said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I won't," Damien said. "I simply want to understand why, during the entire gathering, you were the only one among us who did not ask a single question about how the cubs were taken, or where they were found, or how they survived. Everyone else wanted details. You wanted none." Willow's composure cracked slightly at that, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she smoothed it away again. "I was shaken by the news. Forgive me if grief looked different on my face than you expected." "Grief," Mia said quietly, stepping forward for the first time, "usually asks questions. It wants to understand what happened, to make sense of senseless things. What you displayed back there wasn't grief. It was fear of being caught." Willow's eyes snapped toward her, sharp and suddenly far less composed. "You know nothing about our ways, human. You have no right to judge what our grief looks like." "Maybe not," Mia said steadily, "but I know what guilt looks like. I've served enough difficult customers to recognize it instantly, and you've been wearing it since the moment Damien mentioned a traitor." For a long moment, Willow said nothing, her jaw working silently as though caught between denial and confession. Finally, something in her seemed to give way, her shoulders sagging under a weight she could no longer carry alone. "I didn't want them hurt," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I swear to you, that was never the intention." Damien's expression hardened instantly, then explained to me exactly what the intention was. Willow closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself before continuing. "My father has spent years believing leadership should not remain locked within a single bloodline indefinitely. He believes it breeds complacency, weakness, the kind that leaves an entire pack vulnerable when a single line fails to produce strong enough successors. He never intended violence. He wanted only to delay Sable's line long enough to prove his point, to force discussion of shared leadership before she came of age to inherit unopposed." "Delay?" Damien repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. "You call abandoning 22 cubs in a hidden pit a delay?" "It was supposed to be temporary," Willow insisted, tears gathering in her eyes now. "A trusted associate was meant to retrieve them within hours, keep them hidden safely elsewhere for a short time, just long enough to force a conversation about succession before returning them unharmed. Something went wrong. The associate never arrived to collect them as planned." "Why not?" Mia asked. Willow's face crumpled further. "I don't know. I've tried to reach him since discovering they were rescued instead, and he hasn't responded. I fear something happened to prevent him from following through." Damien's expression turned to stone, or he intended something far worse than delay from the very beginning, and used your father's discontent as cover for a plan neither of you fully understood. The color drained from Willow's face as the implication settled over her. "You think I was used?" "I think it's entirely possible," Damien said grimly. "Who is this associate? Give me a name now." Willow hesitated only a moment longer before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cedric Vance. He serves as a scout along our northern border. He approached my father months ago, claiming to share his concerns about succession, offering to help arrange something that would force change without causing real harm." Damien's jaw tightened further at the name, recognition flashing across his features. "Cedric has never been fully trusted within my inner circle. I should have paid closer attention to that instinct." "What happens to my father now?" Willow asked, fear plain in her voice. "That depends entirely on how quickly we find Cedric, and what we learn from him," Damien said. "If your father's intentions were truly nothing more than a misguided attempt at delay, that will be considered. But if Cedric intended something far darker, and used your family's genuine concerns to disguise his own agenda, your father bears responsibility for enabling that, regardless of his original intentions." Willow nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, the weight of consequences settling heavily over her. "I'll help however I can. I never wanted any of this." Mia watched the exchange with a complicated mixture of sympathy and lingering caution. Willow's guilt seemed genuine, her shock at the depth of what had truly happened equally real, but the danger clearly had not passed. Somewhere within the territory, or perhaps already fled beyond its borders, Cedric Vance remained unaccounted for, and if he had indeed intended something far worse than a temporary delay, The threat to the cubs, and now to Mia herself, was far from over. "We need to find him," Mia said quietly, meeting Damien's eyes, before he realizes his plan has already unraveled. Willow wiped at her eyes, composing herself slightly, before speaking again, her voice steadier than before. "There's something else you should know. Cedric asked me, several weeks ago, about the old paths along the northern border, the ones few of our people still use. At the time I assumed it was simple curiosity, the kind of question a scout might ask about terrain. Now I wonder if he was already planning somewhere to retreat to, somewhere he assumed no one would think to search." Damien's attention sharpened immediately. "Show me exactly where on a map, every detail you remember." Willow nodded and led them toward a small gathering hall near the clearing's edge, where detailed maps of the territory hung along one wall, used typically for planning patrol routes and border assignments. She traced a finger along a section of old, disused paths near the northern border, marking several points where Cedric had asked pointed, oddly specific questions in the weeks leading up to the cubs' disappearance. "These paths haven't been maintained in years," Ethan said, studying the map over Willow's shoulder. "Most of our scouts avoid them entirely because the terrain is unstable in places, prone to small rock slides. It would be an unusual place to establish anything permanent, which is exactly why it would appeal to someone hoping to avoid detection," Mia said. "Nobody patrols an area they've already written off as unsafe." Damien studied the map for a long moment, committing the marked locations to memory. "Then that is where we begin searching, at first light. Willow, I want you to remain here, under guard, until this is fully resolved. Not as punishment, but for your own protection. If Cedric suspects you've spoken with us, you may become a target yourself." Willow's expression flickered with something between fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not treating me as an enemy, even after everything." "You made a mistake trusting the wrong person," Damien said. "That is different from choosing to cause harm yourself. I intend to remember that difference when the time comes to decide how this is handled." Mia watched the exchange with quiet approval, recognizing in Damien's measured response the same instinct that had made her trust him almost immediately outside her apartment door days earlier, a willingness to seek the full truth rather than settle for the easiest, most convenient answer. Damien nodded grimly, already turning to issue orders to nearby guards, setting in motion a search that would stretch across the territory and beyond it, racing against a clock none of them could accurately measure, chasing a man who had already proven willing to sacrifice 22 innocent lives in pursuit of whatever true goal he was hiding behind Willow's father's misguided cause. News arrived just after nightfall that Cedric Vance had not been seen at the northern border in 2 full days, a detail his fellow scouts had apparently dismissed as nothing more than an extended patrol. Damien received the report with a grim expression, immediately calling together a small group of his most trusted trackers, Mia included, despite murmured objections from several of his advisors. "She stays close to me," Damien said firmly, cutting off the objections before they fully formed. "She identified Willow's deception when none of us noticed it. Her instincts are proving more valuable than any of us anticipated." Mia felt a flush of something unexpected at his words, pride mixed with lingering nervousness about the danger still unfolding around them. She had spent her whole life reading people, learning to anticipate difficult customers before they even realized they were about to cause trouble, a skill she had honed out of necessity rather than choice. She had never imagined it would prove useful in hunting down a wolf capable of orchestrating something as cruel as what had happened to the cubs. They set out at dusk, moving quickly through the darkening forest toward the northern border, Damien leading the group with quiet, focused intensity. Mia stayed close beside him, aware of the guards flanking them on all sides, their earlier caution now replaced with grim determination. "Tell me about Cedric," Mia said as they moved. "What kind of person is he, really?" Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "Quiet, efficient, the kind of wolf who does his job well without ever drawing much attention to himself. I never had reason to suspect him of anything before this, which troubles me more than if he had shown obvious signs of discontent all along. Sometimes the quiet ones are hiding the most," Mia said. "Apparently so," Damien agreed grimly. They reached the northern border as full darkness settled over the territory, the trackers immediately fanning out to search Cedric's usual patrol routes for any sign of recent activity. Mia stayed close to Damien, watching carefully as the search unfolded, her earlier instincts already working to piece together fragments of information gathered from Willow and the pack's records regarding Cedric's recent movements. "He requested additional patrol shifts near the eastern ridge over the past month," one of the trackers reported, returning from a brief scouting run. "Far more than his usual assignment required." "The eastern ridge borders unclaimed territory," Damien said, frowning. Why would he need additional coverage there? Mia's mind raced, connecting details that had seemed unrelated moments before. Unclaimed territory means no oversight, no witnesses, nowhere anyone would think to look for something being hidden. If he wasn't planning to simply hide the cubs temporarily like Willow's father believed, if he intended something more permanent, that's exactly where he'd want to operate. Damien's expression sharpened with grim understanding. You think he built more than one trap? I think it's worth checking, Mia said. They moved swiftly toward the eastern ridge, urgency propelling them faster through the darkening forest, despite the growing exhaustion weighing on all of them. As they approached the unclaimed border territory, the trackers slowed, scanning the ground carefully for any sign of recent disturbance. It was Mia, unexpectedly, who spotted it first, a patch of earth near the base of a large rock formation that looked subtly wrong, the vegetation slightly too uniform, the ground slightly too even. There, she said, pointing. That looks just like the trap I found before. The trackers moved quickly to investigate, carefully clearing away the covering to reveal not a pit meant for cubs this time, but something far more troubling. A hidden cache of supplies, documents, and provisions, clearly meant to support an extended stay far from pack oversight. Damien sifted through the documents with growing alarm, his expression darkening further with each page he examined. These are maps, he said grimly, detailed layouts of our territory's defenses, including vulnerabilities I wasn't even fully aware of myself. He's been planning this for far longer than a single failed cub retrieval. Planning what exactly? Mia asked. Damien's jaw tightened as he continued examining the documents. It looks like an attempt to weaken our defenses gradually, exploit the resulting instability to seize control, likely using the succession crisis Willow's father hoped to create as cover for something far more calculated. The cubs weren't simply meant to disappear temporarily. I believe Cedric intended them to vanish permanently, creating a leadership vacuum he could then exploit. The weight of the revelation settled heavily over the group. The true scale of the danger the cubs had narrowly escaped becoming devastatingly clear. Had Mia not stumbled upon the trap when she did, had she hesitated even slightly longer walking home that night, the entire future of Damien's pack might have unraveled entirely, exploited by someone willing to sacrifice 22 innocent lives in pursuit of power. We need to find him now, Damien said, his voice hard with resolve, before he realizes his plan has already fallen apart and decides to cut his losses entirely. Before they set out again, Damien pulled Mia aside briefly, his expression softer than the urgency of the moment might have suggested. You don't have to come further, he said. You've already given more than anyone could have asked. If this ends in confrontation, I won't think less of you for staying back with the guards. Mia considered the offer for only a moment before shaking her head. Sable trusted me the first night, before she had any reason to. I'm not about to stop now, when it actually matters most. Something in Damien's expression shifted, a quiet warmth breaking briefly through the tension etched across his features. You continue to surprise me, he said. Good, Mia said, managing a tired smile despite everything. Keeps things interesting. They gathered the group quickly, moving with renewed urgency toward the eastern ridge and the old mining paths beyond it. The documents recovered from Cedric's hidden cache, tucked securely away for later, fuller examination. As they walked, Mia found herself thinking of Sable, safely asleep back at the heart of the territory, unaware of how close her future had come to being stolen entirely, and how much still hung in the balance with every step they took deeper into unfamiliar, dangerous terrain. A tracker returned suddenly from a nearby ridge, breathless with urgency. My king, we've found fresh tracks leading further east, toward the old mining paths. Someone passed through very recently, within the last few hours. Damien's eyes met Mia's, grim determination passing silently between them. Then that's where we go next, he said. Tonight. Mia nodded, steadying herself despite the exhaustion pulling at her limbs, aware that whatever awaited them along those old mining paths would likely determine not just Cedric's fate, but the safety of everyone she had come to care for so quickly and so fiercely over the past several days. The old mining paths wound deep into rocky terrain that Damien's people rarely traveled, narrow trails carved into the hillside decades earlier, and long since abandoned by anyone but wildlife. Mia followed close behind Damien, her legs aching from the long trek, her senses sharpened by adrenaline despite her exhaustion. He knows this area well, Damien murmured, studying the fresh tracks leading deeper into the rocky passages. Better than I expected. This isn't somewhere most of my people would think to search. Which is exactly why he chose it, Mia said. They moved carefully through the narrow passages, guards spreading out ahead to scout for any sign of ambush, though the tracks suggested Cedric was moving alone, likely unaware yet that his carefully laid plans had already begun unraveling. Mia kept close to Damien, her mind working through everything Willow and the documents at the Eastern Ridge had revealed, piecing together a clearer picture of the man they were pursuing. "He's not just fleeing," Mia said suddenly, stopping Damien with a hand on his arm. "Think about it. If his plan already failed once the cubs were rescued, why keep moving deeper into hiding rather than simply disappearing entirely? He could have fled the territory the moment he realized his associate never collected the cubs as planned." Damien considered this, frowning. "You think he's regrouping? Preparing something else?" "I think someone that calculated doesn't abandon a plan this elaborate just because one part failed," Mia said. "He built a hidden cache with supplies, documents, maps of your defenses. That's not the preparation of someone planning to run. That's someone planning to adapt." Damien's expression tightened with grim understanding. "Then we need to move faster." They quickened their pace, following the tracks deeper into the rocky terrain until they emerged into a small hidden clearing, tucked between towering rock formations, invisible from any distance beyond its immediate perimeter. A modest camp had been established there, a small fire burning low, supplies neatly arranged, and standing near the fire, clearly startled by their sudden arrival, was a wolf in human form, tall and lean, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to calculated calm. "Cedric Vance," Damien said, his voice carrying across the clearing with unmistakable authority. "It's over." Cedric's eyes flicked briefly toward the guards positioned around the clearing's perimeter, before settling back on Damien, a thin, humorless smile spreading across his face. "Is it? I wonder how much you truly understand about what's actually happening here." "I understand you orchestrated an attempt on the lives of 22 cubs," Damien said, stepping closer. "I understand you manipulated Willow's father's genuine concerns about succession to disguise a far more calculated plan to weaken our defenses and seize power for yourself." Cedric's smile did not waver. "Ashcroft's concerns were genuine, yes, easily exploited, unfortunately for him, but you're mistaken if you believe this ends simply because you found me standing here." "Meaning what exactly?" Mia asked, stepping forward despite the danger, unwilling to remain silent while Cedric spoke in riddles. Cedric's gaze shifted toward her, curiosity flickering behind his calculated calm. "Ah, the human who ruined months of careful planning. I confess, I didn't anticipate someone outside the pack discovering the cubs before my associate arrived to properly dispose of them." Mia's stomach turned at the casual cruelty in his words, but she held her ground, refusing to let fear show on her face. "You mean kill them?" "Disappearances create opportunities," Cedric said simply, as though discussing nothing more significant than weather patterns. "A leadership crisis, properly managed, opens doors that centuries of tradition otherwise keep firmly closed." Damien's fists clenched at his sides, fury radiating from every line of his body, though he maintained enough control to keep his voice level. "You would have murdered children to seize power for yourself." "I would have created circumstances favorable to change," Cedric corrected calmly. "Unfortunate collateral damage, perhaps, but necessary for progress your bloodline has stubbornly resisted for generations. There is no version of this that justifies what you attempted," Damien said, his voice hardening further. Cedric's expression finally shifted, calculation giving way to something colder. "Perhaps not in your eyes, but my associates elsewhere within the territory may see things differently, especially once they learn how close I came to succeeding, and how easily a single human woman disrupted plans that took months to arrange." The implication hung heavy in the air, and Mia felt a chill settle over her at the realization that Cedric was not acting entirely alone, that others sympathetic to his cause might still be lurking within Damien's own ranks, waiting for another opportunity to act. "Who else is involved?" Damien demanded. Cedric's humorless smile returned. "That, I'm afraid, you'll have to discover on your own." Before anyone could react further, Cedric moved suddenly, attempting to bolt toward a narrow gap between the rock formations, clearly having anticipated this confrontation and prepared an escape route in advance. But the guards Damien had positioned around the clearing's perimeter closed in immediately, cutting off every possible avenue of retreat before Cedric could take more than a few steps. He was subdued quickly, though not without a brief, tense struggle that left Mia's heart pounding until it was finally over. Cedric restrained and unable to cause further harm. Damien approached him slowly, expression carved from stone. "You will answer for everything you've done," Damien said quietly. "Every name, every detail, every plan you've made. And you will do so before the entire pack, so that no doubt remains about what truly happened to those cubs, or why." Cedric said nothing further, his earlier calculated calm finally giving way to sullen silence as the guards led him away, back toward the heart of the territory where a full accounting awaited him. Mia watched him go, relief and lingering unease warring within her in equal measure. Cedric had been caught, but his final words lingered ominously in her mind, the suggestion that others sympathetic to his cause might still remain hidden within the pack, waiting for their own opportunity. Damien turned to her, exhaustion and relief mingling in his expression as their eyes met. "It's not entirely over," he said quietly, echoing her own thoughts, "but we've stopped the immediate threat. The cubs are safe, at least for tonight." "And after tonight?" Mia asked. "After tonight," Damien said, "we make certain nothing like this can ever be attempted again." Mia nodded, exhaustion finally overtaking her as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving behind only a bone-deep tiredness and a fragile, hard-won sense of relief. As the group prepared to depart the hidden clearing, Mia found herself standing near the dying embers of Cedric's small fire, staring at the scattered documents the guards had begun collecting for the journey back. Damien approached quietly, following her gaze. "You're thinking about what he said," Damien observed. "About others, sympathetic to his cause." "I can't stop thinking about it," Mia admitted. "If he's telling the truth, this isn't over just because we caught him." "No," Damien agreed. "It likely isn't. But we have something now we didn't have before. A name, a confession, a trail of evidence that will help us identify anyone else involved, whether they acted directly or simply looked the other way while he made his preparations." "Do you think Willow's father knew about this deeper plan?" Mia asked. "Or was he truly only ever concerned with succession, exactly like his daughter said?" Damien considered the question carefully. "I believe Holden's concerns were genuine, and I believe Cedric exploited them without ever revealing his full intentions. That does not absolve Holden of responsibility entirely, but it does mean the true architect of this conspiracy was Cedric alone, at least as far as we currently understand." "At least as far as we currently understand," Mia repeated. "That's not exactly reassuring." "No," Damien said honestly. "It isn't, but it's the truth, and I would rather give you the truth than a comfortable lie." Mia appreciated that more than she could easily put into words. She had spent years working a job where customers often wanted to hear whatever made them feel better in the moment, regardless of accuracy, and something about Damien's steady honesty, even when the truth was unsettling, felt like solid ground beneath her feet after days of uncertainty. "Then let's get back," she said. "I want to see the cubs again. I want to know they're still safe." Damien nodded, and together they turned to join the rest of the group already beginning the long walk back toward the heart of the territory. Around them, the guards began preparing for the journey back to the heart of the territory, carrying with them the promise of answers still to come, and the quiet knowledge that the danger, while diminished, had not yet been entirely extinguished. The gathering called 3 days later drew every family within the territory, filling the clearing far beyond the numbers present at the first uneasy meeting. Word of Cedric's capture and confession had spread quickly, and with it, a mixture of relief, anger, and lingering unease among the pack, uncertain how many others might have shared his ambitions in secret. Mia stood near the front of the gathering beside Damien, watching as guards brought Cedric forward in restraints, his earlier calculated calm entirely gone, replaced by sullen resignation. Beside her, Sable sat quietly, no longer trembling or fearful, but watchful, alert, already beginning to display the quiet strength that would one day define her leadership. 3 days ago, Damien began, his voice carrying easily across the silent clearing. 22 cubs were nearly lost to a plot designed not simply to disrupt succession, but to eliminate the future of this entire pack for personal gain. Cedric Vance has confessed fully to his role in this plan, and has named those who assisted him, knowingly or otherwise. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as several names were read aloud, some belonging to minor associates who had unknowingly provided small pieces of information without understanding the full scope of Cedric's intentions, others belonging to a small handful of genuine conspirators who had actively supported his plans for their own reasons. Holden Ashcroft stood near the front of the gathering, his expression heavy with shame as his own limited role in the affair was addressed. "My concerns about succession were genuine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never intended harm to come to the cubs. I was a fool to trust Cedric's assurances, and I will accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate." Damien studied him for a long moment before responding. "Your concerns about tradition and succession are not without merit, Holden. Even if your judgment in this matter failed badly, I will not punish honest disagreement, only the willingness to enable harm in pursuit of it. You will face consequences for your role in enabling Cedric's plan. but they will reflect the difference between misguided trust and deliberate cruelty. Relief flickered across Holden's face, along with continued shame, as Damien turned his attention finally to Cedric himself. "You," Damien said, his voice hardening considerably, "sought to use the genuine concerns of others as cover for a calculated attempt to seize power through the deaths of 22 innocent children. There is no version of tradition, no interpretation of leadership, that justifies what you attempted. You will face the full consequences our laws prescribe for such a betrayal." Cedric said nothing, his earlier defiance entirely extinguished, and the guards led him away to await formal judgment, the weight of his failed ambitions finally settling fully upon him. As the gathering began to disperse, Damien turned to address the crowd one final time. "Let this serve as a reminder to all of us," he said, "that the strength of this pack lies not simply in bloodlines or tradition, but in our willingness to protect one another, even when the greatest danger comes from within our own ranks. And let it also serve as a reminder that sometimes, the greatest courage comes from those outside our world entirely." He turned to look directly at Mia, and the crowd's attention followed his gaze, settling on her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush despite everything she had already endured over the past several days. "This woman," Damien continued, "found 22 frightened cubs abandoned in the woods, with no knowledge of what they truly were, and no obligation to help them at all. She could have walked away. Instead, she risked everything to save them, and continued risking everything in the days since, to help uncover the truth behind their abandonment. I owe her a debt this pack can never fully repay." Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd, along with soft, grateful sounds from several of the cubs gathered nearby, Sable foremost among them, pressing herself affectionately against Mia's leg as the gathering watched. "I am not simply a waitress who happened upon something extraordinary," Mia said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice as she addressed the crowd for the first time. "These cubs trusted me from the very first moment I found them, and that trust changed something in me I don't think I can ever fully explain. I don't regret a single moment of what happened, even the frightening parts. I would do it again without hesitation." In the days that followed the formal gathering, life within the territory slowly began settling back into its familiar rhythms, though traces of the recent upheaval lingered in small, quiet ways. Extra guards remained posted near the nursery grounds for weeks afterward, a precaution Damien insisted upon despite Cedric's capture, unwilling to risk complacency after everything that had nearly been lost. Holden Ashcroft, humbled by the consequences of his misplaced trust, took on a reduced role within the pack's council, though Damien made a point of publicly acknowledging that his concerns about tradition, however poorly acted upon, deserved honest consideration rather than dismissal. Willow, freed from suspicion once her full cooperation became clear, spent considerable time near the nursery grounds in the weeks that followed, helping care for the cubs as though trying to make amends through action rather than words alone. Mia often found her there in the mornings, quietly tending to the smaller cubs, and the two women, despite their rocky introduction, slowly built something resembling friendship out of shared experience and mutual relief that the worst had been avoided. Sable, meanwhile, grew steadily stronger and more confident with each passing day, her earlier fear giving way to a quiet, watchful curiosity that Damien assured Mia was the earliest sign of the leadership qualities the pack had long expected from her. She followed Mia constantly during those weeks, curling up beside her during quiet afternoons, trotting alongside her during walks through the territory, as though the bond formed during that first terrifying night in the pit had settled into something permanent neither of them fully understood but both instinctively protected. Damien too changed in subtle ways Mia noticed more with each passing day. The constant tension that had marked his features since the cubs first disappeared gradually eased, replaced by something calmer, steadier, though he remained vigilant in ways that spoke to lessons learned rather than danger fully past. He sought Mia's counsel increasingly often, not simply regarding matters connected to the cubs, but on broader questions of pack governance, seeming to value the perspective of someone who approached his world without the weight of generations of tradition clouding her judgment. "You see things we sometimes miss," he admitted to her one evening, as they watched the cubs play together in the fading light. "Perhaps because you weren't raised believing certain things could never be questioned. Or maybe I just spent years learning how to read people who don't always tell you the truth up front," Mia said. "Waitressing teaches you things you don't expect." Damien's laugh, quiet and genuine, was a sound she had not heard from him before that moment, and she found herself smiling at the simple, unexpected warmth of it. The gathering had called for a final formal announcement 3 days after Cedric's capture, one meant to close the chapter on the immediate crisis, even as its longer consequences continued unfolding. Families gathered once more in the same clearing, this time with far less tension weighing over the assembly, the relief of resolution finally settling fully over the pack. The gathering slowly dispersed after that, families returning to their daily routines with a renewed sense of security, though the events of the past several days would clearly linger in memory for a long time to come. Mia remained behind with Damien and the cubs, watching as Sable and her siblings finally began to relax fully, playing together in the clearing with the carefree energy of children who no longer carried the weight of fear upon their small shoulders. "What happens now?" Mia asked quietly, watching the cubs play. Damien was silent for a moment, considering the question carefully before answering. "That depends largely on you," he said. "You have seen a part of our world few outsiders ever witness, and you have proven yourself worthy of a place within it, should you wish to claim one." Mia turned to look at him, surprised by the offer, though perhaps less surprised than she might have been only a week earlier. "What kind of place?" "Whatever kind you choose," Damien said. "You could return to your ordinary life, and I would ensure you remained protected and undisturbed. Your memory of these events respected rather than erased. Or, if you wished, you could remain closer to this world, to these cubs who have already grown so attached to you, and to a pack that now considers you far more than simply a stranger who happened upon something extraordinary." Mia looked down at Sable, who had abandoned her play to trot back over and press herself once more against Mia's leg, gazing up with the same intelligent, trusting eyes that had first caught her attention in that hidden pit in the woods days earlier. She thought about her small apartment above the laundromat, her tired shifts at the diner, the quiet, uneventful life she had lived before that fateful walk home through the trees. She thought, too, about the fierce protectiveness she had felt from the very first moment she pulled that first shivering cub free from the pit, a feeling that had only grown stronger with every day that followed, despite the danger, despite the exhaustion, despite everything that had gone wrong along the way. "I think," Mia said slowly, looking up to meet Damien's eyes, "that my life stopped being ordinary the moment I heard that first cry in the woods. I don't think I want to go back to pretending otherwise." Something shifted in Damien's expression at her words, relief and something warmer, deeper, settling into his features as he studied her face. "Then, perhaps," he said quietly, "this is simply the beginning of something neither of us fully expected, but both of us, I think, are ready to embrace." Mia smiled, watching as the remaining cubs gathered around them both, 22 small lives she had saved from a hidden pit in the woods, now playing freely and safely in the heart of a world she had never known existed, until fear and instinct led her to it. Whatever came next, whatever challenges still lay ahead for Damien's pack, for Sable's future leadership, for the fragile trust now forming between two worlds that had never truly understood each other before, Mia found herself ready to face it, guided by the same simple instinct that had led her into those woods in the first place. She had heard a cry for help and she had answered it without hesitation. She would continue answering it, she realized, for as long as these 22 lives, and the extraordinary king who led them, needed her by their side.